Here.
Thanks. Thanks, Chris. Welcome, guys. You know, it's funny. We're in this is the 4th year of Smart Kitchen Summit, and I figure, you know, we're all kind of the understanding that appliances are changing. We kind of had that conversation, which is interesting. But what I really wanted to dive in deep this year, and particularly this panel, is business model evolution. Because now that we've kind of seeded the market a little bit with new products, and we can start to rethink business models, I think that's a really rich conversation we can have. What strikes me is, as I look at the 3 panelists, by the way, before I get into this, let's quickly do some introductions so people know who you are. So real quickly, Chris Young, tell people.
I'm Chris Young. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called ChefSteps. We're probably best known for our Joule sous vide device, but we think of ourselves as a smart cooking company that's trying to help our customers choose to cook a better meal at home. And I do everything from janitorial services to product design there.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Naegeli. I'm Director for Innovation and Marketing at Nestlé, and I'm the founder of our team called the Silicon Valley Innovation Outpost, which is a team we founded about 5 years ago, and that is focusing on digital innovation, particularly new service opportunities, as well as new business models.
I'm Brett Dibkey. I lead brand marketing for Whirlpool, which, if you don't know, Whirlpool includes not only the Whirlpool brand, obviously, but Maytag, KitchenAid, JennAir, and Amana. So that's the portfolio of brands that we have. In addition to that, I lead the IoT group globally, as well as a kind of a portfolio of standalone businesses that includes the Yumly acquisition that we did about a year and a half or so ago.
So what strikes me about these panelists is that you guys, you know, if I looked at you 5 years ago, let's imagine ChefSteps existed 5 years ago,
it was a pirate ship.
You had very defined roles, but now I see, I see Whirlpool getting into recipes. I see now that ChefSteps was started as a kind of an online content communities now into hardware, and Nestle is kind of experimenting all these things. You started to deliver food to the home, and you're experimenting with business models. So, are the traditional roles breaking down? Is it hard to describe what you are anymore? Brett, can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think for 107 years, we'll be 108 years in 2019. We were an appliance company, a metal bender, so to speak. And now we're much more focused on end-to-end consumer experience. And so, for us, I'm not sure the business model fundamentally is changing, or we know exactly how it will change. But certainly the definition of what a product is at Whirlpool is changing considerably. It's no longer just the metal box. That's a big part of what we do and will continue to be. But increasingly, the digital experience that surrounds the metal box is part of our identity and who we are. So I do think that's having a pretty profound impact on how we define ourselves internally.
Yeah, and that was a little bit, when we started our team in San Francisco. I remember I wrote this article 5 years ago about product brands becoming digital service companies as well. And people were like, what are you talking about? And our executives are like, no, we are making food products, not services. And today it's like the most natural thing in the world. People are really starting to talk about, yeah, of course we need to add services in order to increase the value proposition of our physical goods. And it's fascinating to see that change kind of evolve over the past 5 years. And I think we're becoming much more targeted on what are the services that are really going to add value to people's lives. And that is going to make the brands really experiential. Because to your point, I do believe that's the way how we are able to differentiate ourselves. Because, CPG, it's really hard to differentiate just through the product alone. And so adding those services, value-adding services, is, I think, really the key to create competitive advantage and to connect with consumers in a much deeper level. So you're not thinking about this push advertising, but really about how do you engage with the consumer and have this conversation. And I think that's where we are, from an innovation perspective, where we're placing a lot of bets.
And Chris, you started last week officially. I think technically you had some betas, you had some tests, but you officially became a food company in a way. Even you're a food content company, you had hardware before, but now you're actually shipping essentially a food product. So in a way, you're competing with like the Nestle's of the world.
Yeah, we might be crazy. So we think of ourselves in some ways as a full stack cooking company, but really what that means to us is our job is to help people cook. And any business profits when they're actually able to do something of value for a customer. We designed all our products, whether it was starting with content where we read the comments, to hardware that's 100% connected to our customer, to now our food products. These are all products that are meant to solve a particular problem for our customers, but also give us a constant connection and feedback to our customers so we can learn and iterate about what's working and what's not and keep innovating faster. So, content just turned out to be a really good place for a very small team without a lot of money to get started. But we very quickly realized that that's not enough in the food world. You have to go further and actually move some atoms around. And that ultimately drove us into hardware. But the value of hardware was saying, look, we don't want to make money just when people buy our hardware. That's not interesting, and ultimately the margins are terrible. It's how do we participate in their kitchens for years to come, continually solving problems with them, where products and services are just sort of monetization points that indicate how well we're doing at solving people's problems. So our food products, which we've been working on for years, we're saying, look, at the end of the day, people only use our products because they want to eat something, and they want to eat something delicious. So we kind of felt we ultimately had to go there, but that was ultimately saying the problem we want to solve is how do we make it easier for people to choose to cook with our devices. And that forced us to basically work across this whole stack. But I really think that's the future, where you're going to see brands built up based on their ability to directly reach a customer and directly solve problems for them. Otherwise, Amazon owns you.
Stephanie, it's interesting. As a 100-plus-year-old company at Nestle, things are pretty entrenched in terms of behavior. You are kind of on that in kind of the innovation engine that they're trying to create. I looked at what you guys did last year, for example, but it does carry some risk. So I looked at what you guys did last year, and you had that Nestle Sweet Bake delivery service, and that was kind of an interesting thing to me because it's the first, I think, subscription product that Nestle ever had. But then you had a third-party partner that went belly up in Chef. So did you learn any lessons from that? I mean, as you try to kind of reinvigorate Nestle from a creative standpoint and innovation standpoint, did you learn anything from that and kind of relying on third-party partners?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting opportunity, right? So one of the areas that we are focusing on is what are these new business models that are emerging that could create completely new opportunities for the company. And what Mike is referencing is last year we launched Sweet Bake, which was a direct-to-consumer baking kit, which would deliver all non-perishable goods with the recipes as well as decoration materials so that your baking experience actually looks really great, like Pinteresty. And what was super interesting for us is to learn how excited consumers were about this value proposition, and that there is an opportunity to go direct to consumer, but you really have to nail the experience. And it was a little bit of a different approach than a meal kit, because when you look at meal kits, what you're trying to solve is this, what do I cook tonight, right? What is the meal that I want to do tonight? And it's like a day-to-day thing. And that's what meal kit's going after, the everyday dinner. With Sweet Bake, what we were looking for, it's much more like a hobby. People don't have to bake to survive, right? But they're enjoying it and they like to do it. So the price point can be very different. We compare ourselves more to a Birchbox versus actually to a HelloFresh. And that's what's really interesting. And two of the things that we learned from there. So first of all, if you nail the value proposition, you have to be really clear of what that is. So for example, consumers, when you look at baking, right, there's always these specialty ingredients that are really hard to get. So you want to make matcha cookies, and that's just ingredients that you're not going to find it in everywhere. So those are some of the things that you can provide with a baking box like this. But then also this decoration materials, that the experience looks really beautiful. And these are these foolproof recipes that make it really easy for people to do. So those were some of the things that we learned. And of course, when you can try to increase the value proposition in that way and is really trying to solve a consumer problem, then there's also a way how you can make money with that. Now, this was the first prototype. It was like a pilot phase. We've just been testing it out. Right now, what we're doing is we're just basically aggregating all the learnings to kind of think about how we're going to move to the next level to launch something at a bigger scale.
By the way, I have my Slido up. I wasn't checking Facebook, so we will go to. I'll try to get a question or two in, so submit those. So it's funny when I look at Chris, you're a pretty new company. You can kind of start from scratch in a lot of ways, as you did with your manufacturing facility for the sauces. You could go quickly to that and kind of do small batch. And then, like, when I look at something like a Whirlpool bread, kind of you're bending metal. The pace of innovation is a little slower, but you are bending metal. So, do you look at like a company like ChefSteps or like some of these newer companies and say we need to get faster because the pace of innovation is moving faster?
Yeah, without question. We also, which seems to be the in vogue thing to do, formed an innovation incubator called W Labs 4 or 5 years ago. And in part, that's intended not only to serve as a more agile, scrappy development mechanism in its own right, but also develop a capability then that can be exported back into the core business. The development cycles of large, mostly steel and plastic and metal appliances is pretty lengthy. The exciting part of what we're entering now, though, is with the products being connected and sensor-enabled, we can continuously push new over-the-air updates to that product as a platform and continue to improve the experience over time. And that work obviously can happen in much faster cycles. So an example, we relaunched the Whirlpool brand kitchen suite of products in Q1 of this year, and since that time have pushed 3 over-the-air updates to the product that have meaningfully impacted the type of experiences that consumers have in home. And so that development cycle, how are we thinking about experiences that we can deliver with the product that's already in the consumer's home, is obviously occurring in a much faster development cycle than the hardware itself.
I like to ask about data because it is transformative for businesses, I think, as we start to get into this world. I think you've been data native from the beginning in terms of like when you have your hardware out there. Bread has probably been a newer thing in terms of like, and then if you have an angle on it from a Nestlé perspective, like, are you getting rich data because you guys aren't necessarily serving hardware? I guess you are in a way with Nespresso. How has your business changed, start with you, Brett, as you start to get richer data?
Yeah, so we bought Yummly in May of 17, so a year and a half or so ago, and one of my favorite things to say around the office when we bought them is, and they were a team of 40-ish people, and we had about 100,000, and they had more data scientists at Yummly than we had at Whirlpool when we bought them. Fortunately, that dynamic has changed a fair amount since then, but we were not a native data company, and we're building that capability to a large extent from the ground up. And I do think in some known ways it's having a transformative impact, and then some unknown ways as we're gathering data and capturing insights, we're learning our way into some things. So maybe a couple of quick examples. One of the earliest models we launched that was connected was a Genair wall oven, and it's a connected product. It's been in market now for a couple of years, and like most ovens, it has a number of different cooking cycles and modes, and after running the product over tens of thousands of cycles, we're starting to see what modes beyond bake at 350 or broil at 550 are actually leveraged. And one of the modes that we marketed and we're very proud about, and it consumes some food science and embedded software firmware resources, was a mode called frozen bake pizza, where you could put a frozen pizza in the oven and the oven algorithm would adjust for the fact that you're beginning with a cold start. After more than 20,000 cycles on the product, in thousands of consumer homes across the country, the cycle had not been used not once. And so, seeing things like that we were actively marketing that as a feature that consumers should care about, we learned consumers don't really care about it. So it allows us to be a little bit more purposeful in our innovation and the type of product that we're developing. And another example that may be a bit more relevant to Stephanie, we have a feature on most of our cooking products, Scan to Cook, where you can scan a UPC barcode and send the instructions to the oven so that you get a hot pocket and not a lava pocket or a kind of cold in the middle pocket. And so with that feature, which honestly was not a big area of focus for it, we thought it was kind of interesting. Consumer engagement has been really terrific. And now we're starting to capture data on the consumption habits of frozen foods in the home. I'm not sure what we do with that necessarily, but there are insights there that I suspect at some point will be valuable to someone. So it's another example of how we're leveraging data.
Have you figured out what to do with some of that data that you're getting in terms of like?
Yeah, we so a really good example with our food product, which is the sous vide starter sauce, is our first food product. When the customer scans it, and they scan the bag, they get a rich content experience that you would expect from ChefSteps. They get cooking instructions that helps Joule or a competing device know how to cook with it. But the important thing for us is we actually learn a lot about what they're cooking. We also know what else they have, so that we can not only we can drive consumption. We can be sending in an email the next day at 4 p.m. saying, you still have that chicken tikka masala sauce, you should use it. But it also directly affects what we make. The whole way we approach food manufacturing, and the reason we ended up having to invest in some of our own facilities, was we wanted to be able to use that data. We wanted to see what our customers were hacking with our products, what was trending, what they were creating themselves. And if we see that on a Monday, can we be shipping it the following Monday? And so it's not just let's generate insights that maybe someday we can productize and sell to other companies. It's let's use that data ourselves to make better products faster for customers, because it's ultimately the speed at which you can iterate on your feature set in your products that gives you the advantage. Nobody gets it right the first time. It's how fast can you change. And that goes back to Joule. You talked about 3 over-the-air updates. We call that Tuesday, where we're always pushing updates. We're on any given day, we're dealing with tens of thousands of cooks and millions of cooks a year. That is actually coming back of what content we should be creating. Do we need a new motor inside Joule? Because the failure rate isn't what we want it to be, or they're not cooking on Wednesday. What can we do to get Wednesday engagement up, even though Saturday is great? So yeah, data is everything.
So Stephanie, there's a great question from the audience I want to ask you. Is it time for food brands to rethink or disrupt the relationship with retailers and start exploring all this new digital world opportunities?
So I think for me, when we talk also about data and this relationship with retailers, I think through services, through new digital services, we are able to get much better insights in what consumers need. I think the 2 examples, here, that's the way how we're thinking about it too. So being able to offer the services to consumers is not just about engaging in a deeper level with consumers, but also having a feedback loop, right? Because that is the challenge with retailers today. And so we have a really interesting project. It's not in the US, it's in Southeast Asia and Australia, but we developed a wearable for kids on the kids product. And with that, we help actually parents to engage their kids and to be more active on a day-to-day. So in terms of sports and so forth, and taking more steps. But then the app is also linked to like recipes. So recipe recommendations, keeping track on like, today you ran a lot, so we recommend this recipe for you because it has these essential micronutrients and so forth. So we're really seeing like the opportunity to capture data through this way, and I would say get a much more details in terms of data than we were getting from retailers until now. And I think the same thing holds true for like new business model opportunities. This year I've been working on our personalized nutrition project. Mike talked in his presentation a little bit about Nestlé's journey around personalized nutrition and new business model opportunities in that way. And this was, again, it was a digital service experience with an app, but the type of data that we were able to get to see what are people eating, on which days, which products that we're using the most often, and frankly also, if they wouldn't eat our products, what did they replace them with? And I think that's a huge opportunity for R&D, right? I mean, that's what Chris is saying too. How can you start to modify what you're actually producing, and how can you be more flexible about that? And I think that will be a huge opportunity for CPG in general in the future.
We have 4 minutes left, so I want to get a couple more questions in from the audience. Brett, this is a good one for you. It kind of tugged at my heartstrings as a former market analyst. How many of your appliances are being connected? Adoption percentage, if you can speak to that. And what is your target for connectivity and adoption in the next 5 years?
I told you that if we had any tough questions, that they should go to these guys. Yes, so we don't release that information publicly. What I would say is we are very, very committed to this notion of creating a platform for the kitchen that will be Yummly, and an ecosystem of hardware partners, including our own brands, that work seamlessly with Yummly to remove friction from the food journey. So we haven't and probably won't ever say that, you know, X% or X million units a year will be connected over a period of time. What I can tell you is most Whirlpool kitchen products beginning this year, certainly in the cooking space, refrigeration coming next year, will be connected. We're extending that capability to the KitchenAid brand beginning next year. But by and large, we're going to let the consumer experience. If we're having a meaningful impact on the food journey of a consumer in the kitchen and removing real friction, we'll connect more and do more. I think at this point we have a lot of confidence that we can do that, so we're going to connect a lot of product. But it's not something that we talk about publicly in terms of our specific goals or objectives in that space.
This one's from Joel Schumacher, who's asked a lot of questions. Joel, you're doing a great job on questions. I want to give a shout out to Joel. As food service continues to grow, what other collaborative opportunities exist for new business ventures that cross from restaurant experiences into the home?
It's an interesting question. I think, you can already, as somebody who has, my career began in the restaurant industry and the fine dining world, there's always going to be a place and a need for restaurants, but we've certainly seen how that's fragmented. And, from my perspective now, our competition is choosing to eat out or choosing to use caviar. It's like we win when they choose to cook at all. And I think the real question from a restaurant standpoint is, right, with a traditional restaurant, you're very, very much limited by the fact that you have this physical plant that you can use for a few hours a day to actually serve customers, and the rest of the time it's just costing you money. And so I think one of the questions is, how can you leverage that in your ability to produce, maybe on a very small scale, food products that could benefit a customer? I mean, the thing I always did as a chef was I would rate our larder and take mise en place moment. I could throw together an amazing meal very quickly. There's a lot of things that I could imagine that would be byproducts of a restaurant that could be connected to customers through platforms like this, where they could finish it at home and get, frankly, a better experience than what can be delivered realistically, and where they're still doing the cooking. And so, CPG tends to be very mass market, top down. The opportunity, I think, for restaurants is to think about how are they creating products that can leave the restaurant, go into people's homes, and sort of be more of a grassroots, bottom-up approach to food products.
So I'm going to give you a speed answer challenge, Stephanie, because we have a minute left. This last question is for you. Stephanie, you mentioned services earlier in terms of what you're doing and rolling those out. Can you give some more examples?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the services that I mentioned just before was this personalized nutrition service. So creating an app that really allows people to understand what they need from a specific perspective. So there are biology markers that are in there. But then also, preferences, food preferences, what are some of the objectives in terms of goals and for health? So having an opportunity to make recommendations for people, this question of like, what is healthy for me? What should I be eating personally? So that is a service that we've developed and tested over the past few months, and that has been really interesting. And I think that has a huge potential for new business models in the future.
That's great. You actually had a few seconds to spare. So with those few seconds, let's give these guys a big round of applause.